America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
The crack epidemic happened 30 to 40 years ago. Because of the power holders of that time and racism, the epidemic had a devastating impact on black communities. An economic uproar led to more partying, and this party culture brought in drug use, which included crack, cocaine, amongst other drugs. 1981 was the election of U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Him and his wife utilized the war on drugs as a part of their campaign.
And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
Nancy Davis Reagan and her husband slowly but surely racialized drug use, specifically going to black children and encouraging them to just say no.
Here are 3 side effects of the crack epidemic. 1. Becoming an economic opportunity. Many individuals and families of color struggled financially and for multiple reasons were not able to get jobs. This led to the selling of crack cocaine as an easy way to make money. It was also highly desirable because it was fast money. The money came quickly and people were able to buy things that they couldn't otherwise afford, simply in a matter of hours or days. This side hustle led many students to drop out of school and pursue money making on the streets. Drug dealing became highly popularized, which led to competition among community members and turf wars on the block. This competition led to corruption and violence, and death became normalized. How this affects today. Youth who struggle academically, have adult responsibilities, or have listened to harmful messages that they will amount to nothing else, often still turn to the streets. It is not a rarity. In addition, the violence that spread within these communities also became a way of life, and the family aspect of the black community dissolved. Today, gun violence plagues black communities, and it is truly every person for themselves. On the flip side of all that, although there are many educated occupations among people of color, black men are often labeled as thugs and drug dealers simply based on their skin color. 2. Breaking up families. Although men are highlighted more frequently as users and dealers, women were 100% heavy users and dealers as well. Mothers became addicts, which resulted in choosing an addiction over their families, extorting themselves to pay for their habits, and that extortion often led to pregnancy among these addicted mothers. Children were often left to themselves, removed from their homes, or raised by other family members. In addition to that, pregnant addicted mothers were treated poorly in hospitals, and their babies were labeled as crack babies, and ultimately a danger to society. The idea of crack babies existed to scare higher class communities and stigmatize unborn children of color as burdens to society. How this affects today. There are many studies conducted on the idea of crack babies, and over time, gaps in research have been identified.
Children exposed to crack cocaine in the womb were said to have developmental and behavioral disorders and were going to cause no end of social problems. Now, 30 years later, a review of 27 studies published online Monday in the journal Pediatrics concluded those problems just haven't materialized.
40 years later, black women, especially in low-income communities, are treated unjustly in a variety of ways. Authorities like CPS often remove children from black mothers, especially if they're single. Many times there's little reasoning and assumptions are made of women of color being bad mothers. These types of views result in children being wrongfully removed from their homes. These institutionalized practices have led to thousands of families being torn apart for many generations. 3. Unjust sentencing. Because of its relatively low cost, crack cocaine is more accessible to poor Americans, many of whom are African Americans. Conversely, powder cocaine is much more expensive and tends to be used by more affluent white Americans. For example, the distribution of just 5 grams of crack carries a minimum 5-year federal prison sentence, while for powder cocaine, the distribution of 500 grams 100 times the amount of crack cocaine carries the same sentence. This is known as the 100-to-1 rule, which could also be translated as the 100 black people being convicted for every 1 white person. How this affects today. Although there are more white cocaine users, national drug enforcement and prosecutorial policies and practices have resulted in inner-city communities of color being targeted almost exclusively. This has caused an overwhelming number of prosecutions to be directed against Black individuals, and because of the sentencing disparities, these Black Americans are disproportionately given longer sentences than powder users. Our prisons are overpopulated and have been for years, and Black individuals make up the largest percentage of prison populations.
The importance of uncovering the truth about the effects that racist, oppressive, and historical violence have on today's world is tenfold. This is important because, using the war on drugs and the Reagan era as reference, history tells us a specific narrative that shapes and changes the ways in which we as a society think and understand about people, specifically minority groups of color. Learning about the intentions and facts behind the war on drugs and the crack epidemic and examining how it influences beliefs today is pivotal in promoting change and awareness. Even through these narratives, it is incredibly important to not do drugs because they affect everyone's lives, regardless of ethnic background. If we are able to check our bias, we can be properly informed, be aware of the truth, and try our best to not repeat past mistakes.